So that brings us to Paradise, Season 2, Episode 1, Graceland. Annie is a tour guide in Memphis, Tennessee. When the world ends, her survival in the ensuing years after the day is revealed, as well as her encounter with a traveling group of survivors. Will, what did you think about this episode?
Yeah, so, I have to say, this was not quite what I expected as far as just kicking off, the season, but it was not a bad thing. Um, to me, it made sense to, like, start this way because, we gotta set up things for life outside the bunker and what's gonna happen in the 2nd season. So, because we already know about, obviously those characters and where, the folks in Colorado are. But it was nice to, get an introduction to one of the, 2 of the key characters that we're going to be having stories about this season with Annie and just basically, using this first episode as a way to just sort of set that up, but also still had ties back to what we've seen in the first season and how life was for other people outside of the bunker and other characters when the day happened, when the world ended. So I was it was a positive. I thought that was some good things. Negative, there were some things that were a little predictable, which, but again, overall, I liked the first episode.
Yeah, I just guess I will just say that I know why they dropped all 3 episodes at once. Because I don't know if Paradise will ever come out with an episode that hits me the way the pilot episode does, and my enamoredness. So, and it's hard not to compare because they were both the first episodes of the season to kick off things. While I had so much to say with that one episode, and I know last year they dropped the first 3 as well at once. This season, this episode, it's a good standalone episode. It's a good starter point. It's very much like a prologue,
Mhm.
because they are introducing new characters to us, and specifically Annie. I mean, Link is very much a side note on this. He's gonna become more fleshed out as the season go, I'm sure. But I was just like, "Okay, next." Can we get and there's nothing wrong with this episode. I have very ironically, I have very similar thoughts that I did about the first season of The Night of Seven Kingdoms. Like, it's a fine episode, but I'm also there isn't a whole lot where I found a lot of nuance and a lot of like, "Ooh, I can't wait to have, like, a half-hour discussion with Will about this." It's like, yeah, that was a decent episode of television.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna go straight
yeah,
almost to the end, and I just have one question.
yeah.
Is Alex Sinatra, or do we know who Alex is?
Alex,
Okay, and here's the line that it
yeah,
comes from, and why I ask, is because, there's an exchange,
so
Tiger and Link,
yeah,
and they're alluding to this plan of what they're gonna do. And Geyer says, "We gotta get to the bunker, we gotta get inside and kill Alex." So, my first thought is Alex Sinatra, but
mhm.
then I question it because I don't really remember what her real name is. And then I start to wonder, well, have I met Alex yet? And I didn't know if that stood out to you and if you
Yeah. It did stand out to me as far as, like, question of who is Alex for sure, and as far as Sinatra's first name, I did rewatch the first season, but it's been about probably 4 or 5 months ago now, so I don't recall if her first name was mentioned or not, but, the other candidates for Alex could be, the scientist who helped, build the facility, or it could be someone else that's the thing about this show. I mean, they do have some mystery boxes, and maybe that's gonna be the one for this season 'cause, you know, obviously in the first season, it was trying to figure out who was the individual who assassinated the president, so, among other things. But that
among
was the
others.
but, yeah, that was the season-long, plot point that we
Yeah.
were trying to figure out. So maybe that is what we are going to be trying to figure out, this season as far as with Link's group is, who Alex is and why he or she is so why this group wants to kill them.
Yeah, yeah.
'Cause, I mean, it's a Alex. I mean, it could be Alexandra, it could be
No, no,
Alexander,
no,
I mean,
I
yeah.
understand, what I was gonna say, though, is there's also an allusion to there is something, not someone, in there, like, that we don't know about, that is, like, really dangerous, Link tries to
Mhm.
explain, but he also thinks Annie's not smart enough to understand, so he's not gonna go into details, and then they have a joke about Jaws, I think.
Right.
So I what I'm getting at is I don't know if there's multiple like this ragtag crew may have different motivations. Like one of them
Yeah.
really needs to kill Alex for one reason or another. And then the other one, like Link, is trying to get this thing that is the destroyer of worlds that is in that bunker. The other thing about this and like I said at the top of the show, I only watched this 2 hours ago, so I didn't really go back and figure this out in terms of timeline, but we know from season 1 that there were people who managed to get close to the bunker.
Yeah.
And there were people who left the bunker to kind of go meet some of these people, and then all those people were wiped out. So I guess in terms of timeline, Link and Crew's departure from Memphis,
Mhm.
how does that correspond with the events of season 1 in the bunker?
So, I think it's day 689. We didn't get a sense as far as we did get a
How
sense
long they were there?
how long they were there. I think they were there for, several maybe a few weeks for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
And so I think what we were seeing transpire in Memphis was probably the back half of season 1.
Yeah, yeah, because by the end
Given
of it, we hear the plane crash, and at that point, Link has probably been gone, what, 6 months? 7
Yeah,
months?
yeah,
And
well, yeah.
based on how pregnant Annie is.
Right, right. So, yeah, so that gives you the clues as far as time, because of her pregnancy. Yeah, so I think we're seeing a good chunk of, like, yeah, probably 6 to 9 months, 6 to 7 months before whenever they first get there, and then you give a few about a month maybe of Anne and Link, getting closer. Yeah, I think that
Yeah,
makes sense. Yeah.
interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, I what did you think about Link and Annie together?
Thought they had definitely had chemistry. They whenever they whenever, of course, the Link and his group showed up, the story usually could go one of 2 ways. It could go, the marauder gang that's coming to, like, pillage and do bad things, or it went, and it pivoted to this way where it's like, "No, we are a bunch of nerds who are basically trying to," given that we do know that many people did survive the nuclear attacks and the MPG and all that, just trying to, save keep the power plants from melting down so that, humanity can, like, have a second chance that Cal had intended to happen. I like that aspect of the story.
How much do
And
you think of that is true?
I think the nerd group I think you're right. I think there are multiple motivations that are going on here. So I think some of them are indeed going to, they are doing that because, I mean, you did see some, they were taking a potassium iodide, so that is for, exposure to radiation. And so I think that that aspect of it is true, but I do think that, yeah, as you noted earlier in the discussion, there is another mission that they are undertaking, which is to kill whoever this Alex is.
Yeah. I like the mysteries that
Mhm.
have been set up with these characters. I'm not mean saying like, yeah, this was a decent episode of television. It's just not we've only just so it's hard to really look into nuance of characters.
Yeah.
I think that I can appreciate the development of this curiosity to this, "You're pretty, I'm pretty. Let's be pretty together." You're
Yeah.
actually not as rugged and manually as I thought you were. You're also a lot younger than I thought you were. and you're also a nerd who has never watched any classic movies, apparently. I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of I think we'll find as we learn more about Link that looking back at this first encounter, I think we're gonna find some half-truths,
Yeah.
and we're gonna there are some secrets, very much like Annie, but granted, Annie, we know her secrets. Well, we know some of her secrets
Some of them.
because we spend the entire episode with her. This is very much her episode, the day, and we learn about her mom. And I think my big takeaway with Annie is much less about Annie and more with her mom, where we know her mom got her degree in the
Mhm.
medical field, very
Yeah.
prominent. But we also meet her mom in a very, how do I put it, in a state of incapacity.
Yeah.
And while Annie is the caretaker, and when you realize, like, I'm curious, what I'm getting at is I'm more curious about understanding who her mom was before she got sick, and how it went from this prominent doctor to where we meet her right before her death,
Yeah.
and how that translates into this anxiety, very independent person that we meet through Annie as an adult.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, as far as her mother, yeah, I did there are a couple things that, like, as you noted, one of the just in-universe, but also real-world things too that was a good callback to season 1 was the fact that she went to Duke, and immediately I was like as soon as I heard that, I was just like, "Oh," immediately thought about Cal because
Mhm,
of the whole conversation between, and his nickname Wildcat, which is, reference to to the shot that Leitner took against Kentucky, and so so it was just like those little nice little callbacks to Cal in the first season, and of course, leading to the day, but also the anxiety that Annie, when we see her in med school and she's helping out help out her classmate whenever they were trying to diagnose that patient, but then when it came to her turn and just the panic attack or whatever that she had,
mhm,
the trauma that she dealt with that, and then, fast forward to after the day and the events of having to take care of her coworker, when they were, holed up there in the basement of at Graceland,
mhm.
um, she was able to you know, she was able to, like, at least treat her and whatever anxieties or whatever due to circumstance, she was able to, like, be able to do it, whereas, when she was in a controlled environment in medical school, the anxiety, like, was overtook her, so I wonder if they're bring that up just to say, given that, it's very that she is a doctor and, she is now leaving Memphis and gonna follow after Link and the group, will these anxieties and things that she dealt with whenever she was in med school, will it resurface?
Well, it
And
kinda does because
yeah,
she chooses not to go with Link.
true. That's
She
true.
stays behind, and
Yeah.
which is fascinating, but to go back to the medical school scene just for one second, I feel like in that moment, she was triggered. Where
Mhm.
before, she nothing was triggering her, but she saw something, and then that led to flashes, and then she was overwhelmed, and that led to the panic attack, and we also see that later because she also resets Link's wrist
Right. Yep.
or a finger or something, and
Yeah.
so she's a very capable person, but this whole thing with and her taking care of Gail for the first 45 days after the day. I did write a line. "I think what you did work. I'm not cold anymore. You did it. You saved me. How did you get so smart, kid?" And in
Mhm.
response, Annie says, "I'm not smart, my mom is." So
Yeah.
there's a lot of, like, her because even Link and the others, the nerd squad, when they encounter her, they realize that she's been able to survive for so long by herself because of
Mhm.
her ability to think about things and be smart about it. And so she's not dumb. Like, that was very obvious, and nobody around her thinks that she's dumb,
Right.
but she's refusing to let herself be seen as smart. And I
Yeah.
think that's a very interesting thing to do with a character. She's also, I think, and this goes into what you were getting at with her anxiety that we see return to an extent at the end of the episode when she decides not to go with Link. She
Mhm.
shuts them out both figuratively and literally, where she's so far we've seen her take good care of her mom dies.
Mhm.
Take good care of Gail dies.
Yeah.
She can't dependence on others, she's about to be a mom.
Yeah.
So there I can see a very interesting character or this journey to be very interesting as we go along. She's gonna have Xavier, who's the biggest fixer on the planet.
Yeah.
Who's very much, "Let me take care of you. Let me
Yeah.
not worry about let me take care of you," but is also dead set on finding his wife. So, yeah, I'm glad we're talking about it because
Yeah.
there are bits and pieces. Like
Yeah.
I said, it is a good episode of television. I never said it was a bad episode of
Yeah.
television. I
Yeah.
just wasn't overly like, "Oh my god."
Yeah, well, see yeah, yeah, I had to, like, reset my expectations a little bit because honestly, because I was like, given how we how season 1 ended and Xavier was, flying out to find his wife and everything like that, I did, so for them to go the path that they did, it took me a moment. I have but like I said at the beginning, I think that I understand why they went the direction that they did. And I'm
Yeah.
and it does make sense because you do need to, like, because, like, we've chronicled everything that's happened in the bunker. Now we're seeing how life was for people outside of this quite these are everyday people for the
Yeah.
most part. Because really the people who are in the bunker are the what was it, 25,000 or 200 what was it, 25,000, 250,000, whoever whatever the number was of, like, the best that Dr. Tarabi basically, like, identified as the chosen ones, and
I
so
love how the bunker is not a secret. Have you
yeah,
realized that? How much
yeah,
people know about this bunker? It really I would like to understand more about that communication and how
mhm,
that went out when the world shut down or turned off. But I can appreciate that we're seeing different people go through the day, like, getting different perspectives. The I think at least one episode I don't necessarily think we're gonna get another episode this season that has, like, clear flashbacks to the day,
mm,
but I do think an episode a season we will, where one
yeah,
character
yeah,
we're gonna get Xavier's wife's experience
yeah, we will
eventually,
get it.
I'm
We'll
sure.
get it eventually. Yeah,
So and then also, like, that was also maybe 15 minutes of this episode where it was the survival after the day and also this idea, like, okay, what really did happen? What were the sequence of events? And I like suddenly it's day 30 and it's like the sun is completely blocked out. Everybody is
yep,
freezing
yep,
and you don't hear life anymore, and there's a dullness, and there's a darkness, and it's very The Walking Dead.
mhm,
And then you break out a few years later, and the sun is out, and Annie sees it for the first time in, like, 2 years,
yeah,
and you hear the birds, and the horse returns, and, suddenly things are going again, but there's still a fear. There's
yeah,
still a fear of if I reenter the world, I don't know what I'm reentering into.
mhm,
And I think we see that with Annie, and we felt that very much with Sinatra,
mhm,
even in the first season, about,
yeah,
well, yeah, all of that stuff we know, but still, we're probably safer down here.
yeah,
So, just like Annie thinks she's safer, which arguably she is as a pregnant person in Memphis. So,
yeah,
all right. Well, I think that is it for us tonight. We will be talking next week about the next 3 episodes.
yeah, yeah, we
All
got
3
episodes.
episodes. So
Yep.
strap in for that. On that note, Will, why don't you tell our listeners where they can find you?
Yes, you can find me on all the socials at Will M. Polk, WILLMPOLK.
And you can find me there too at SJ Belmont, SJBELMONT. Please follow our crew on X, formerly known as Twitter at Scene and Nerd, on Blue Sky. Friend us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram and Threads at Scene Nerd, and visit our website, www.sceneandnerdpodcast.com. But most importantly, rate, follow, and comment on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Good night, Geek Out. You're welcome.